Welcome, everybody, to the CFF List Waiver Watch Wrap Up Show. It's a little different this week. We don't have a draft, but it is J-Mill, along with my usual partner, WilleB. How you doing, Willie?
Doing all right.
All right, figure we'd kind of have a similar introduction, even though we're not drafting, because we're going to keep the energy and the advice and the player discussions very similar to what everybody's used to. I guess I'll explain to people what we decided we would do this week, since so few teams will be playing in their league championships, and not too many are having consolation final type matchups. We decided we would spend our time going through the final list of the top by points per game players that are rostered under 30% without us making a decision on who to play. We're going to take a look at what we would call our All-Waiver Watch Team, which is made up of the players going into this final week of the CFF season that are the top performers still rostered under 30% by position. So we'll get to that in a minute. What we're going to do, though, is give our thoughts on if we feel like those players are worth picking up. Maybe they had their better performance for this season early on. Maybe they're just getting hot, and it is somebody you should consider if you're still in a pinch, because we do want to have some advice for you. So that's what we'll do. It'll probably be more clear once we get to that. But quickly, we'll recap the final week that Willie and I had. We had the two-man draft to wrap our head-to-head competition up. Willie was leading 7-5 on a head-to-head win-loss basis going into this final week. So we knew he had won for the season, but my guys came out and played for pride, played to boost my point per game average, and we came away with a small victory, 91.7 to WilleB 77.5, which, as we get into the details, that 77.5 will become even more impressive when you see what happened with Willie's receivers. But first, just point out, give ourselves a little pat on the back. The four biggest players from our rosters all happen to be under 10%. And I think both of Willie's were 5% or less in terms of the ones that were rostered. So, it's tough to get some of these players even when they're under 30. But hopefully the guys that we mentioned that were under 10% were the ones you made a move on and were able to grab because they did the best. And we're talking about L.J. Henderson from Buffalo. He was my leading performer with 29.1. Then you look at Joseph Williams, who I would say, even though we're not doing a draft, if you can go get him this week, actually Henderson and Williams, John Lobb had posted a question, who would you go grab out of four different guys? These were my two answers out of his poll, was Henderson, because he is playing Kent State this week, who is absolutely dead last against the rush. And he's probably still around 10 or 12% taken. Joseph Williams, on the other hand, is a kind of late season emerging true freshman who I mentioned earlier today on Lob's Twitter post, is kind of what you've been looking for in that Kevin Wilson offense for the last 2 years since he's been there, but nobody had really stepped up and emerged, to be the playmaker. But as soon as I posted that, I saw it's a little too late. Kevin Wilson gets the boot at Tulsa after just 2 short years, so he wasn't able to be effective there. Tulsa's going to kind of hit the reboot button and start over, but we'll see if Joseph Williams sticks around. In my opinion, if a coach is being changed, the way his season's finished, this is probably going to be a power 4 player next year, the way his season is finished with 3 games over 25 points, 3 games in a row over 115 yards, and 5 touchdowns in his last 3 games. So Joseph Williams is kind of that shining true freshman that's really broken through here at the end to look forward to for next year in 25. You just got to see where he might end up if it's not going to be Tulsa. But the other players, Willie's 2 guys, again, that were both under 5%. He had the other component there from Buffalo that's really been emerging that he's talked about for a couple of weeks with C.J. Agbana. I still haven't figured out if he's going to have a 6th COVID season or not. He's listed as a senior. Have to do our homework on that, see if he's going to be available for 1 more year, because he really came along here at the end also. And then you've got Robert Henry from Temple. UTSA. They played Temple. And Henry did his thing against that Temple defense that we talked about was in pretty bad shape, and got Willie his high score of 31. The crazy thing, 2 two crazy things. One, we were just talking before we hit the record button. Amazingly, Hauser got me 20 points at quarterback without two of his top receivers. We saw that Sal didn't play, who Willie had last week, or 2 weeks ago, I think. And then he decided to pivot and go with Winston Wright this week. And that leads me to the bigger, crazier thing, which is the fact that Winston Wright didn't even play. One of those classic CFF problems that we have with the conferences that aren't requiring teams to give any kind of injury update. ECU did what they thought was the right thing, kept it a big secret all week, where it wasn't one single flag indicating he wasn't going to play all week, but he got the game time decision of DNP. And then our guy Lockhart. So Willie got his 77 points, even with a 0 from Winston Wright and the Justin Lockhart shocking 0, which was with some activity. How many snaps did you say Lockhart had there, Willie? I know that was a rain.
I believe it was 28.
Yeah. Yeah, a surprisingly low amount of snaps, I think, compared to Nash, who still played like 55 or 60 snaps. So, Lockhart only came in about half the team's plays. Looks like they used the rain as a little bit more of an excuse than UNLV did. Egett had his worst game that you could possibly imagine. I think completed 4 passes out of 22 attempts. And then, so Willie's guy suffered their Lockhart. So unfortunately, he had the double goose eggs at receiver, but still managed 77 points. And I will give him his props. He beat me head-to-head 7-6, reversed last year's outcome. And he also did that on a points per game basis. He ended up with 88.3 as his average this season. I ended up a little bit lower than last year with 83. Combined, we had 85 points, 85.7 compared to our 95. So we slipped a little bit, but we had guests that improved. Pointed out in our recap, the collective average between Willie, myself, and the 19 different guest appearances that we had this year was 90.3, which was up from 89.5 last year. So collectively, pat on the back for me and Willie, pat on the back for those guests and the 19 different appearances that we had. Everybody, I think, did a good job all around. What do you think, Willie, as we wrap up the waivers? How would you summarize the waiver watch this season?
I thought it was great. Got off to the slow start, which, I got to do better on the first month of the season. The guests, they continue to just get better and better. So
right.
I think they like the competition, obviously, because every year it seems like the guests have gotten better. So at what we're doing. So.
And I like that Jared in particular peaked in the finals. Jared ended up with that second highest score of the year with 130, which was in the finals 2 weeks ago. So, great group of guys. Can't wait to have most of them back next year. I know it's tough making time, especially over the weekend after everybody's put in a lot of work during the week. But we appreciate them once again. With that, let's get into this slightly different format and show you guys what we're going to be working with. Willie, you want to scroll it down to our All-Waiver Watch Team for 2024?
Yeah. Before we go down there, I wanted to have you get familiar with Henderson, since you will see him in our playoff final.
All right, yeah.
in WWC.
I might have overlooked that. Okay, go ahead. Let them know. Let them know what you're talking about. Let them know.
Yeah,
this is history in the making.
Yeah, so in our home league, J-Mill and I we're in the championship 2014 league. So you will be seeing Mr. Henderson this weekend. So you'll get familiar with him. And what did you say that was Kennesaw State? Is that the team?
Unfortunately, they're playing Kent State, who is dead.
Kent State. Oh yeah. Oh, even better.
134th against the rush in yards allowed. 266 yards allowed. So, man,
I'm pretty sure they've given up over 30 rushing touchdowns. So, it's going to be fun.
All right. Well, while you scroll down, I'll give a quick tease on that matchup because I've set my lineup, the preliminary one. So, again, it's the home league. We started it in 2008. We eventually grew from, I think, 8 or 10 owners up to 24. We only take 4 to the playoffs. We have a series of bowl games for the teams that finish 5th through 12th with smaller payouts. But Willie and I were 2 of the final 4. For the first time in this league's history, we were both in the playoffs at the same time, which means also clearly we're in the championship against each other for the same time. So that's pretty cool. We got head-to-head. I've got Mateer as my leading guy going against the more consistent Jackson Dart. He'll dry his tears up and be ready to play this week for Willie, going against the rival there at Mississippi State. The other big player you've got the running backs, Henderson and Caleb Johnson. I've got Carson, who I had for the entirety of the season, was about to cut him until 2 weeks ago when he had 33 carries out of the blue and then 25, and then a pretty decent game last night that actually won me the semifinal matchup with his 16 or 17 points. That's exactly how much I ended up winning by, was the amount of points that he scored. So thankfully Carson came through. I've got Mekhi Hughes from Tulane. So I'd give you the advantage at running back. I think I might have the slight edge there at quarterback because I don't know if you're finished with your lineup. I've got Gabriel as my super flex option. We do a super flex instead of two QBs. So what are you thinking there, Willie? You're going to throw in another quarterback here? I know Morris actually played at the end of that game. Maybe you got MJ Morris from Maryland, Sorsby from Cincinnati. So you've got me on running backs, but I might have you on quarterback. So I think we're gonna have a good matchup.
Yeah, it depends. I'm struggling with the Cam Edwards.
Yeah, he's been inconsistent.
I do believe he'll get that double digits. They face UMass, who's also absolutely horrible against the run.
Right.
So I could easily see him having his best game of the season. He should at least get 100 yards and a score. So
yep.
Still waiting a little bit to see if I want to roll with Sorsby or one of the other quarterbacks that we have.
Yeah, your big player from this week. He's worth mentioning because other people might have the same dilemma. You've got Sanders, Lenore Sanders, going against Clemson. Is that why you've taken him out for the moment, anyways?
Yeah, for the moment.
You don't want to throw him in there?
That was actually his first start for us all season. Surprisingly enough. That's a little iffy, as far as championship is concerned.
He's had 3 out of his last 4 have been over 34 points or 34 plus. He's low in that 4-week period, 21. So hopefully
that may sway it.
Okay, I'm not digging my grave, I hope, by having you put him in and then I would get beat by him. That would be pretty sad of me to have advised you to play Lenore Sellers and then you beat me with him.
Right.
Let's do a quick look up of that Clemson defense on the passing stats, and they're kind of middle of the pack. 53rd, 18 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. So they get a lot of interceptions and just give up kind of a moderate amount of TDs. So probably not anything you should be too scared of, but better than most. But I don't know. You might have to roll with your guy there.
Yes, I mean, Sanders, he is actually the future, for the team. So,
yeah,
a guy like that, you probably just can't be worried about, who the matchup is. You just have to play your studs. So, he's playing like a stud right now. So,
yeah. And on that note,
you may have talked me into it.
All right, I should have taken the play your studs advice myself. It thankfully wouldn't have won me the game because then I would really be upset and kicking myself. But in the 48-team league, I had put out the poll. I had the dilemma of having Daly, who was our Army's quarterback, going against Notre Dame. But I also had Aguiar from App State playing JMU, and I had Vasco playing Georgia Southern. My gut, the consensus, even Purple Rain did a deep dive on his podcast to help me figure out who to play. And all 3, the public, Joe Arpazzi and myself, all said go Vasco. He got 4 points. Daly got 25 against Notre Dame. The point is, like you just said, Willie, you got to go with your studs. You got to go with the guys that got you there. Don't get freaked out about the matchups in the end.
Right.
If you've got a guy that averaged 30 or 35 like I did with Daly, he got him for a reason. He's just a good player. They were outmatched by Notre Dame, but he still got his 25 points. And, man, if I had lost by 20, I would be killing myself this morning or this evening because that's the worst thing for me in fantasy. I'd rather get blown out and not have had any bench options than lose by a point total that somebody on the bench could have saved me from the loss. You just don't want that coaching mistake to haunt you forever. But I'll be playing for that third place payout in the 48-team league. So we'll see how that goes. But all right, you ready for this?
Yes, sir.
All right, brand new. We posted this last year, after week 14 or after the equivalent of the end of the regular season. Like I said, we thought it'd be interesting to share it with you a week early, talk about the players that you're seeing here, because again, it's the players at this moment who have the highest points per game at their position that are under 30% rostered. So they're not guys we picked, just going with our gut and our instinct. It's the guys who lead the point total that are under 30%. So we're going to give kind of a yes or no. Should you play them? Should you be excited if you've got them? Kind of a quick version of a start, sit them, going through. The first guy on the list is actually a guy who got me to the finals in our home league, which is Big Dorian Fleming from Georgia State, who had his breakout game of the season with 28 points this week that included 3 touchdowns. You have his matchup, Willie. I don't have it here. Right, I can get it, but
Yeah. They got Coastal.
Okay, so I've had him in the home league all year. He's popped up, I think, on my waiver team maybe twice. I know he's been on the waiver watch a couple of times. So I'm going to give a thumbs up to Fleming. He's done me right. He's been consistent, if nothing else. He hasn't had that big game until this week when he had his 28, but he is a guy that will continuously get you those kind of 8 to 11 points. Usually it centers around 9 or 10. So I'm giving the thumbs up to Fleming. You agree, Willie?
Yeah, I'd have to say so. I mean, this is his first scoring game since late September,
Yep.
but he has been hovering around all of our waiver watches
Right.
all season long. So might as well stick with it.
Yeah. And prior to this week's 31 points, if you're going on we use a half PPR in our home league, but if you're going on a true PPR, he had 31 and a half this week. But to Willie's point, he didn't have any touchdowns the last several, and he still had 8.5 the 2 weeks prior. He slipped a little bit and had two 6-point games, but before that it was 13-8, 13-10. So I think counting on him to get minimally 8 to 10 if you're in a pinch, go for it. Next guy on the list. Do you have any? You want to start off with any thoughts on John Michael Gillenborg, who is the second most points per game of the guys under 30 here at tight end?
Yeah, he's been up and down.
Yep.
One good game, one bad game. Probably the last 6 out of 4, or last 6 weeks. He's due. He has a decent matchup against Washington State, who's 110th versus tight ends. If we're just, I haven't looked at all 4, but if we're only choosing 2 of 4, I'd probably give him the thumbs up, just based off of the next 2 names that we're going to see. But I'd say this is a decent matchup for him.
Yeah, I like the matchup. I don't think he's as consistent maybe as Fleming, a little bit riskier. But not the worst guy to play in a pinch. He's proven he can get double digits, but he can disappear from time to time. Also, he was injured early in the season, came around I think about week 5 or so. He's been solid. I wouldn't say great, but he's been solid. He's clearly averaging 9.7 points a game for a reason. He's earned them, but I think that's come from more games in the lower single digits paired up with those 13, 14, 15-point games. Versus a Fleming who's kind of hovered more closely around the 8, 9, 10-point range on a consistent basis. So moving over to the right side, because the group of 5 guys dominate the list of players on the All-Waiver Watch team, and my theory is that's because there are some Power 4 only leagues. So when guys aren't in those Power 4 leagues, it lowers their roster percentage. I'm not sure if that's exactly how Fantrax does it, but I think there's a tendency to, have group of 5 guys less rostered because of the Power 4 leagues that are in Fantrax. But to make some of those Power 4 names available to you and talk about them, we've also got a Power 4 only All-Waiver Watch team here. And if you look, the first guy is not far off from Gillenborg. Gillenborg was ranked 24th as we speak. He's 24th tight end in the country in fantasy points. Cole Taylor is 27th, so it's not a big drop-off here. And Willie was mentioning he thought Gillenborg was maybe the better play. I think they're about the same. Their points per game are exactly the same. Their rankings, they're right there with each other, the 24th versus 27th. And I see the same inconsistency. Cole Taylor can get you the double-digit games, but he can disappear. I'm looking at, 3 games he's had under 5 points, but he's had 4 games over 10, or 5 games over 10. Looks like his biggest game was 16. So the matchup, I haven't looked at that yet. Willie, did you see?
The reason I say no is because we saw what Ollie Gordon did to Texas Tech. That's who they play this week. We saw what he did to Texas Tech last week. Had one of his better games of the season, had 156 yards rushing and 3 scores. C.J. Donaldson is also coming off a great game, and so this should be another C.J. game. So C.J. should be able to hopefully reach that 100-yard mark. He almost did against Central Florida. So if the film, if you studied the film, I mean, you have the tape to see what you need to do against Texas Tech, and that's just run on them. So feed CJ the ball, and that's going to probably cut into Cole Taylor. So that's why I say if we had to pick 2 of the 4, that's why I took John Michael instead of Cole.
Okay. But we both agree on Fleming. The last one, I think we'll both probably agree, is a tougher matchup. It's a name that I know Willie snickered a couple of times this year when I put him on my waiver team, but he did okay. He's the transient tight end here who moves from team to team quite often, and that's Michael Trigg. He's another guy coming off his highest game of the season this week. He had 19.6 against Houston. He's had an 18-point game midway through the season. But again, he's even more inconsistent than the other 2, and he's got a much tougher matchup going against Kansas. He doesn't find the end zone a lot. He still managed to get about 9 points a game. He's right at 8.8. But, 1, 2, 3, 4. He's also got 4 games at 5.1 or less points, another that's 6.7. So I think kind of rolling the dice and hoping he has another 18 or 19.6 point game is not something you want to do in your championship. So I would hope, if you've got Trigg and someone else, that someone else is a better option. But he would be a worst case scenario if you needed to go find somebody, because he is capable of the double-digit games. It's just you don't know when he's going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, of the 4, I'd put him 3rd. But I mean, Kansas gives up 232, and they've given up 21 passing touchdowns also.
Right.
They're 92nd in the country versus the pass.
Right. So there's room. There's room to make it happen. So there we go. We'll keep it rolling. Move right into the wide receivers. What you will notice here, this is the only position where we had Power 4 guys appear on the overall All-Waiver Watch team. The top 2 wide receivers are actually Power 4 guys. You've got Eli Pancol from Duke, Trent Walker from Oregon State. Frankly, 2 guys I didn't hear a lot about as the season was going on. I remember kind of considering Trent Walker, having him on my list, I think, one time, but I really wasn't up on Pancol from Duke. Do you know much about the Duke receiver here, Willie? He's averaged 16.3, so I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Maybe
I mean,
I'm looking for Duke guys.
I know he appeared on a few waiver watch teams earlier in the season in the competitions. So I mean, he's had some decent games. I think he's only had 4 games where he was under double-digit fantasy points. Okay. But he's had a 21.1 the very first game of the season. That was against poor Elon. But he put up 32.8 against SMU just 3 weeks ago, and then he had his best game against Virginia Tech when he had the 41.8. So
that was this week.
He's capable. He's
another guy.
Capable.
I don't know where he was sitting in the points per game average before this, but I'm sure that 41.8, kind of skyrocketed him up there, gave him a boost. He's at 16.3 right now. He's your wide receiver 44 in the country overall. So, if you're looking at a league that starts 3 receivers, that's 36. If you had a flex, that's 48. So just based on his ranking and where he falls within the rankings alone, he's a starter-worthy guy, being among the top 48 wide receivers out there, assuming, in every league on a given week, there's 48 that are usually rostered and playing in a 12-team league. So, based on what he's had these 2 big games in 4 weeks, 33 points and nearly 42 points. His targets, looks like he's averaging in the last four about 8 or 9. He had one with just 6, but he caught 5 of those. So he's been pretty efficient with his catches when he does get the targets.
Yeah, and what I do like about him is that he's able to score. He's able to get into the end zone. So he's scored in 6 of their 11 games.
Okay, and then as for the matchup, he's going against Wake Forest, who is 131st in giving up fantasy points to wide receivers. So let's see how that also matches up. They're also 131st in the country in yards allowed with 281. So I would say based on those numbers, this guy's a go if you got him. let's get the Dookie in there. Yeah. All right. And so then we'll move on to our other Power 4 guy, which is Trent Walker. And again, Panko is only rostered on 13% of teams. Trent Walker is only on 14%. And they're guys that are averaging that magic number that we've looked for on the waiver watch all season. We look for quarterbacks that can get you 20. We look for receivers who at the worst would get you 15. These guys are averaging that. We forgot to mention that about the tight ends. We're looking for tight ends that can get you 10. Basically 3 of those top 3 tight ends are averaging that for the season. So the next 3 wide receivers are all in that category. Trent Walker from Oregon State, Cameron Shanks from UAB, and Adrian Norton are all averaging over 15 a game, and they're ranked right behind one another, 51st, 53rd, and 54th. As we go through this. But what do we know about Trent Walker here, Willie? I know I had him in my notes one time, but I don't think I ever put him on a roster. So.
He's on my team in the home league.
Okay.
So aside from that Air Force game, you'll see because he had 25.6 against Washington State yesterday, had the down game against Air Force, but then 26.1, 16.8, 17.7 in the last 5 weeks. So and he gets the targets. That's the main thing. He had 15 targets yesterday.
Yeah.
And he got that 25.6 without reaching the end zone.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. He had 12 catches, 136 yards. Again, skipping over Air Force, who he kind of had a down game again and a bad loss, 6.6 points there. Going against San Jose State, he had 26.1 with another 11 catches for 151 without even touching the end zone. So I like your point there. He's going to get you your 20 points, it looks like, or at least 17, which is what he's kind of had, in the last 5. He's only had one that was really below. Actually, in the last 6, because going back 6 games, he had 22 against Nevada. So, yeah,
that's one of my another dilemma guys on who to start, especially since they have Boise this week.
Well, I'm going to push you away from him, even though I'm going to tell everybody else if they've got him, they should play him. Let's see who his matchup is. He's playing Boise. I think you just said that.
Yeah.
In Boise's, pretty bad against the pass. 20 touchdowns allowed, 261 yards. I think you got a good matchup there, Willie. I hate to say it. That's 2 guys now. Maybe I'll talk you into playing against me. I'm self-sabotaging here.
Yeah. Like I say, it's scary, but I just don't want to run into that situation where you're trying to choose that flex and this automatically assuming, okay, it needs to be a quarterback. Well, a lot of times it doesn't. And like I told you earlier, 3 of my losses have been when I'm just gone to the next quarterback when there are other options in other positions.
Yeah, so here's a real life start-sit dilemma. Like, so if you're right now, if we're going off of your current lineup, you've still got Lockhart in the lineup, even after he upset you last week, over Trent Walker. So that's something that you're saying is not a done deal. You might actually take Lockhart or Pritchett out and put Walker in.
Pritchard's probably not going to come out.
Okay. So,
but you have to understand. I'm going to take that has to be a one-off as far as Lockhart and San Jose State. Because Lockhart was just playing too well to just, it's like I say the game against Boise. Lockhart had 16 targets. He had 10 for 172 and a touchdown. So how do you go from 16 targets to just 3, and then you only play 28 snaps? I don't care if it is raining. You have to do better.
I was going to say, they did the new addition. You know what that is. Blame it on the rain.
Yeah. Oh, God. Well, I'm sorry. You can't blame it on the rain. Okay, we talked about it pre-show. UNLV did just fine.
The UNLV did fine. Their quarterback suffered in terms of his percentage a little bit, but he managed to still at least be 50%, was 10 out of
Ex-
20. Ricky White still had 8 catches for like 90 yards. There's no
right.
excuse. Yeah, I agree that Lockhart and Nash, couldn't catch passes. And actually, I don't even think it was Lockhart and Nash that were the problem. It was clearly the
No.
quarterback who was 4 out of
Right.
22.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. So I'm going to go for Walker if people have him. I like him. Let's move on to Shanks, which I know is another guy you've had on, I think, your waiver watch here very recently. So,
Yeah.
what
A
do you
couple of
think about
weeks.
Shanks? Yeah.
A couple of weeks. I mean, I know he's not going to get that 46 like he did a month ago, but he's been double digit points ever since. So they get Charlotte, who for whatever reason is pretty decent, I guess, against the pass,
Yeah, that might be one
according to
because their running
Fantrax.
defense is so bad. While you talk, let me look at their running defense and see if that's the case of like. Yeah, teams don't have to pass against them is the problem. They've
Okay.
given up 28 touchdowns on the ground and
Yeah,
over
and 15 through
220
the
yards
air.
a game, basically. So
Yeah, and
teams just
yeah,
don't have to do it, so they're not doing it. Yeah.
yeah. So, and the things about Cameron is he also has that return ability. So if you're getting points from special teams, a lot of leagues don't do it. But if
I don't
you are,
understand. Yeah.
you still would be able to get a little bit of that. So I mean, he returns one for a score, you may get an easy 10 out of
Right.
him.
Yeah. I'm going to say, you know, just based on he's got a good floor. He's one of those guys that seem he's had the 46-point game, so you could argue he's got a high ceiling, but he's only done that kind of he's only had that kind of game once. He had a 46 pointer, but then he had a 21-point game. And besides that, he's kind of in your lower teens or 12 or 13, 14, 15 points in that range. He's a safe bet if that's going to be enough for you, but if you're looking for a guy that can get you to 20 or 25, I think you got to look at other places. I don't think Shanks is going
Yeah,
to be that high, and I think
I think
running
going
about 12 or
forward.
13 in your championship might not get it done for people.
Yeah, I think going forward next year and the year after, depending on where he ends up, he's one of those guys that needs to be getting a lot more handoffs. So jet sweeps or put him in the backfield, whatever you need to do, get him in space and get him the ball.
Yep.
These two little measly carries that he gets off and on, that's not it.
Now Adrian Norton from Akron, it's again another guy that we've seen here before. We've seen the name come up as a guy to consider, even when he wasn't drafted. Looking at his numbers, I see a guy who's very similar to how we just described Shanks. He's had, one game that was close to 30, two that were 24, 25 points, but otherwise he's kind of that 10, 12, 13-point guy who you'd be happy if he got you 15 or 16, but he seems to safely be able to get you the 12 or 13 like Shanks would. So again, if you're in a bind and you have them, play them and take the 13 or 14 guaranteed points, but another guy I don't think you count on at all to have the big game for you, just based on probably the lack of talent around him on that team.
I mean, I think he could benefit for a little bit better quarterback play, kind of like we were saying with
Yeah,
San Jose State last week. But,
yeah,
because even going back to the week before against NIU, and we talked about that a little bit, 11 targets and you have 2 receptions, something's wrong with that.
yeah,
He did a little better this week, but I just think overall, if you get a little bit more consistent quarterback play,
yeah.
he'd probably be a lot better.
Yeah, and it looks like he's actually also he doesn't have like the exceptional matchup. They're playing Toledo, who's around 55th and 58th. They're 55th in rushing, 58th in passing. But shockingly, Toledo's only given up 12 passing touchdowns, and they're on the top half of yards allowed. So again, not the most favorable matchup there, and they play on a Tuesday. So
Yeah,
um,
and one last thing about him, he is that up and down guy. So 168 yards receiving, 28, 98, 57, and then he had the 107. So he's due for another down game. And whether that's the quarterback or not, I'm not sure, but that's just what he shows.
yeah, yeah. The next guy is very exciting. We mentioned a freshman early on, from Tulsa that's coming along at the end of the season. He came around a little too late to make this list. We're talking about Williams from Tulsa. Another freshman that has caught a lot of attention is Emmett Mosley who's on the he's one of the other two on the Power Four only all-waiver team for Stanford, and he's a guy who has started to raise some eyebrows because he had back-to-back games with 48 points and followed that up with 18 and 14 targets and then 8 targets. So he's emerged as kind of the true wide receiver one there at Stanford. They're getting decent quarterback play. So Mosley's a hot commodity. Who are they playing this week, and what's it looking like for Stanford in terms of?
I'm missing the back to back. Did you mean to say that?
No, I said back to back with good games. He had the 48.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah, he had the 48.5 point game 2 weeks ago, and then he had 18. So,
gotcha. Yeah,
those are both numbers. You'd love the 48, but a lot of people would also just be very happy with those 18 points. And that's 4 touchdowns in the last 2. So very similar to Williams from Tulsa. He's a guy who really the last couple of weeks has emerged. Frankly, I think I'd take Williams over this guy. He's averaging less points per game at this point because he hasn't had that big, 48-point game to boost his number up there like Mosley does. But he's proven, that he can get closer to 20 than some of these other guys, even though he wasn't being utilized, in the beginning and even in the middle of the season. He's the hot guy for Stanford right now. So, I like him if you got him. He's one of those guys. He's playing San Jose State. It's not
this is why I like that Lockhart matchup because this should be 2 passing team. Stanford, they give up 271 through the air. They've given up 27 receiving touchdowns. So, if you could play either one of them, I'd like games like that as far as they should be passing.
Right. All right. So I think we're both saying that. Are you saying would you play Mosley if you had him, or would you put him up kind of in that top tier that you would consider playing this week of going against San Jose State?
I mean, I'd consider playing him. Like I said, yes, I probably would.
Yeah, and then again, we're basing this mainly on just his last 2 weeks of usage. Getting more targets prior to that, but just it wasn't converting into catches and yards. But it looks like now he's kind of synced up with the quarterback, and things are a little bit smoother there for him. The last guy here is going to be a definite no for me. He upset me when I did have him on my waiver watch team earlier this season. And let's throw out the 21.5 he had this week against Oklahoma State. Look at the fact that prior to that he had 4.6 and 8.5. He's got a 1.4. That's probably the week I had him. Who knows? But he's got a 4.4. So again, he's had 36.9 against Baylor midseason. But other than that, and the 21 he had this week, he's very consistently at 11 points or less. So he doesn't do enough on a regular basis for me to have any faith in playing him and expecting good numbers if I've got him on my team this week.
Yeah, I agree with that. I kind of like his teammate a little better. A little biased because I have him. Talking about Eakin.
Oh, okay.
I like Eakin, but obviously he's not. He's over the roster limit. But I definitely would not start Caleb.
Yeah, and it seems to be, even with when coaches change, it seems to be a classic Texas Tech dilemma of you don't know what receiver is going to be the hot hand. So it always sounds better than it is, when you're taking a Texas Tech receiver because they pass the ball so much, but they also spread it out a lot.
Right.
So it's kind of frustrating in that sense. But we'll move it on over to the running backs. I think we've got a lot of familiar faces here, starting it off with the 55th running back overall, which is Rajai Harris, or let's say Raj. We'll just call him Raj Harris from ECU. Let's see. ECU is going against
Navy.
Okay. So how's that matchup looking for old Raj here?
Yeah. Let's see. Got to go back and switch to
Navy
rushing defense.
That side of it's favorable. They've given up 162 yards a game. We know the commentary when people are playing at service academies is there's fewer snaps. They slow the game down like Army and Air Force, but they're also managing to give up 160 yards on the ground a game. So Harris, he's been on a couple of recent waiver teams, if I'm not mistaken. We definitely heard his name just about every week as a guy to consider.
He should, based on just his matchups against Tulsa and North Texas the last couple of weeks. So he should have been.
Yeah, and it seems like Navy, if you're looking at those, would fit in just as favorably. And in those games against Tulsa, he had 28 and a half, and he had 30.8. So I'm going to be a thumbs up if you've got Raj Harris to play him and feel good about it.
Now, does it scare you at all that he had 9 for 34 against a team like Army, or do
Uh,
you consider?
because a similar style of like maybe,
Right.
yeah. Well, he's still got 10 points, so I mean that's not the worst
Yeah.
game. Yeah, so no, I think let's compare Army here for fun. Army's 10th in the country against the run. So no, that makes me feel a
Okay.
lot better. I'm glad you asked that question because you know you would think same kind of style of game, but clearly Army's much better at containing the run than Navy is. So I'm going to say yeah, full go on Raj. Forget what you saw in the first half. He's one of those guys that's kind of developed into the clear leader in the backfield there.
And probably because Daly is dominating and controlling the game.
Oh, with Army, yes, definitely slowing down. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Willie, you've got him. Let's tell us all about your guy Henderson that you expect to beat me up this week. We talked about him in the recap where I had him last week, but
Yeah, I'm glad that it didn't hurt me. I'm trying to think. I was able to get him not too long ago. We'll just say this: 4 of his last 5 games have been over 23 points.
exactly.
So, and he's definitely going to get the carries. I love that they found their bell cow. His carries have gone 12, 14, 18, 27, and then 25, which you love that. He's been in the end zone for 4 of the last 5 weeks. So, and then the matchup, like you said, they're dead last in the country versus the run. And what do they give? They've given up 33 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, he's probably got the best matchup of this week. He's at 13%. So, I mean, this is a guy that you potentially put in place of a guy that you thought was one of your best running backs, I think. If
Right.
you still go out and get him, you don't be afraid of it. They are playing early. Looks like they're playing also on Tuesday. So why not go out and get that huge lead in your championship game with Al-J Harrison? Because I like to talk about guys kind of having a tale of 2 seasons. This is interesting. He's really had a tale of 3 seasons. He was getting 7 carries, 5 carries, 2 carries in the first third of the season. Then he kind of averaged about 15 carries for 3 more games. And as Willie said, he's had 25 and 27 in the last 2. He had 18 carries before that. And what have they done in those last 3 games? They've won. So I think they're going to like the correlation of if we keep feeding him the ball, we're going to win. So I don't think that pattern changes, especially against Kent State. You can't go
Yeah.
wrong.
And I'll be starting him over LaQuinn Allen. So,
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's a must play, for Al-J Harris. Moving over, we got Robert Henry from UTSA, another guy that we mentioned in the waiver watch from earlier in the show that Willie had this week, who had 30 points this week. So I had Henderson, Willie had Henry. I don't even know if we have to say too much more about that, except to maybe look at their matchup, Willie, because we know
he has Army.
he's
So
got Army. Okay, there's the dilemma. There's your dilemma.
yeah,
Um,
I don't see him getting. He's had 30 plus the last 2 weeks, and
you know,
so yeah, this is just an unfortunate matchup in my opinion. But
Yeah, and we talked earlier about kind of playing your big dogs, not worrying about the matchups. The reason I would consider this a possible exception is he hasn't done it all year, so there's a big difference when you're talking about kind of the guys like we mentioned Daly, who's done it consistently for 10 weeks. Henry has emerged the last 2 weeks, but before that 3 points. He had a couple games in the teens, but you had an 8.7, a 5.1. You've got a 4.6 down there in the mix. And also, there are a lot of weapons on the UTSA team. The quarterback, the tight end, the receivers are good. So, if Army's shutting down the run, they have the ability to pass the ball. And I think that's what they're going to end up doing more against Army because, that's where they'll find the most success. So, yeah, as much as we love his last 2 weeks, I think it's the opposite of Henderson, where if you have a a guy you really like on your team, you don't need to go trying to grab Henry, to replace him this week.
Yeah,
Um,
definite no for me.
yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. Let's look at Freddie Brock. He's again, he's been in my notes. I don't think that I've taken him in the waiver watch this week. I mean, this year,
No.
another guy that might have gotten a boost and really, helped his points per game by having 31 points this week. A lot of these
Hmm.
guys, kind of finishing strong, but he's also been a little too inconsistent for me. He had 3 points before that, 8 points before that. It's hit or miss if he's going to even get to 10 carries. It seems like 10 is the mark for him. He's had a lot of games where he's had 10 even. But when you're only getting 10, you're taking a lot of gamble there on, not getting too many yards and maybe not even getting to the end zone. And prior to the 3 touchdowns he had this week, he only had 3 touchdowns all season. So Freddie's points per game is nice. But I don't know if I want to count on him in my championship game this week.
Yeah, don't be swayed by Coastal being in green. They've only given up 17 rushing touchdowns, give up 178 on the ground, but it's just too inconsistent. That 11 for 16 and then the 9 for 24 the 2 weeks prior, that's
Yeah.
what worries me.
And then, I don't know that we need to do as much of a deep dive because this next group on the Power Four, you're kind of dropping down to your running backs that are kind of at the RB 82, RB 84, RB 87, and RB 96. But I do know, Willie, you've been really hot with Davin Booth from Mississippi State.
Hmm.
Let's look at him and kind of see what the matchup's looking like there for Booth from Mississippi State.
Well, they get Ole Miss, and Ole Miss they should be pretty pissed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And they're second in the country against Iran, which
yeah,
doesn't help either. Okay.
right.
All right. So there it is. There's your quick no on Booth. He's not a guy he's reaching out for. In Texas, who's Texas? Texas has A&M this week. So let's see how that Wisner matchup's looking. A&M's 41st in the country, but they've only given up 12. Wisner was kind of the hot midseason pickup, even though he still didn't get over 30%. People are, I think,
I've
yeah,
been high on him, but
yeah,
what I love about it, though, I don't like the matchup this week, but I love what they did against
mm-hmm,
Kentucky. I mean, he had 26 carries.
yeah, yeah. And he had 17 in his last game before that against Arkansas. Something happened against Florida. He only had
They didn't
4.
need him. They didn't need him.
Oh, right, in the 49-17. Yeah, so you're looking at a guy when they had the injury situation there after week 3. He's had 13 carries every game since then, except for the Florida blowout.
Hmm.
So he's a guy that I think has definitely had a more consistent season than a lot of these guys. I think you can count on him for kind of that 15 to 17 point game, but certainly like a 13 to 17 point range kind of guy. And he catches the ball, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he had several games where he had 4 or 5 catches. It's gone down a little bit in these last couple, but I think he's a good all-around player, and it was a great pickup for the people that did get him. And it is worth a peek if again, if you've had an injury or just have another guy with a bad matchup that you don't trust. So Indiana, my gut says stay away from Indiana running backs because it's just you can't guess which one is going to get the carries. They're very evenly split here. Tyson Lawton is the third guy on our Power 4 only all-waiver team, but he's still only averaging 13.3. I think he's had a few more carries these last 2 weeks with 12 and 15, but he's got a 6, he's got an 8, he's got a 7, he's got a 6. He's splitting the carries kind of by design there with Ellison from Indiana. So,
Well, they do have a good right matchup
who's
against
that?
Purdue.
Okay.
Purdue gives up 200 on the ground. They've given up, I think, 30 rushing touchdowns.
Right.
So they're going to give it up on
No.
the air and the ground.
All right. Yeah,
So,
that's the second most in the country, by the way, that number you just mentioned. Only worse than Kent State in terms of
yeah.
touchdowns allowed. So I may take back a little bit of what I said, even though he's splitting the carries, and it's hard to guess who's going to get those big yards against Purdue and who's going to get in the end zone. It looks like there might be a good chance he's going to get in the end zone. Then I might have to take that back just because of the match.
Someone's going to get in the end zone multiple times, is all I'm going to say.
Okay. All right. So if you're in a pinch, there you go, Lawton. Now, the next guy, I have to admit, is another one of these names that, for whatever reason, I missed during the season, and he's sitting here kind of as the eighth best available running back under 30% based on a points per game, which is Iowa State's Carson Hansen. And it looks like I spelled it wrong when I was searching for him.
No, you're fine. I changed it on the sheet. Okay, I got you.
Yeah. Looking at his recent history again, kind of going on the fly, keeping it fresh here. He had a big game this week with 24. Prior to that was 7. He's had probably way too many. Looks like this week was maybe a little bit of a fluke, getting as many points and 2 touchdowns.
That's where he gets it is the end zone. I mean, you look at his yards
right,
though.
Exactly.
I don't like that.
No, it's hit or miss. Yeah, he's had 4 multi-touchdown games, but that's only a third of his. Like that sounds great, but if you're counting on a guy, that's means there's a 66% chance he won't get in the end zone still. And he's not going to get much more than 50 or 60 yards. So,
right.
Do you want to count on a guy that's going to get you 6 points and might get you 18 if he gets his 2 touchdowns? Probably not.
Yeah. And Kansas State has only given up 10 rushing touchdowns.
Okay, so there's your definitive no to round out the running backs. Find other options outside of Carson Henson, who is also he's 12.6 points, which is impressive, but it's near 100. He's running back 96, so it's a little bit of a reach if you're going to have to go that deep.
Yeah.
All right. Now, this next group is pretty exciting because I think you got some really good options here if you're still somehow in need of a quarterback. I don't know necessarily how you could have gotten to your championship if you were in that situation, but you never know. You guys might need to hear.
How does Old Dominion have a top 10 quarterback?
Yeah, and I watched him play every snap against Marshall this week. This kid can run. He can move. He was way more athletic than I thought he would be. He's got the swivel hips, when he's scrambling around and getting around the corner. So he was very impressive. What year is he? He's a freshman.
He's a freshman.
Yeah, he's a dynasty guy that you need to get your hands on. If you're in one of these 62% of leagues that don't have him on a roster, and
55 carries in the last 3 weeks.
Right. We understand, you might be in a Power 4 and you can't get excited about a guy like this if you're in a Power 4 only league. But if you're in an all-teams league and, you can grab him, it's a shame, somebody probably didn't because, again, most leagues these days, you're starting 2 quarterbacks. If you're in a 12-team league, that means 24 guys have to play every week, and he's sitting there at number 10. So he's not just the second quarterback on your team. He could be the first quarterback on your team as a top 10 quarterback at this point. And his numbers scream out, take me. You got to go back to October 12th to get a game below 25 points. And even the game before that, he had 35. So once he became the starter on October 5th, which, was probably week 5, he has had only 1 game below 25 points. Most of those are over 30, 1, 2, 3. If you count the 29, 4, 5 out of 7, he's at 29 plus points. So he's doing it every which way. He's a true dual threat. He's throwing for 250 and 300 yards. He's rushing for 50 or 100 and getting to the end zone 3 times on the ground in 2 different games. But 1, 2, 3, 4. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games where he's had rushing touchdowns to go along. So can't say enough about this kid.
Yeah, if he doesn't turn the ball over, I'm trying to see his interceptions. I think he only has 5 interceptions.
2 huge. Okay, there's the down. You just hit on the downside. 2 games where he had 5 interceptions in back-to-back games against App State and JMU. So he could be a little. He could be a little bit of a gunslinger, it looks like, and just kind of throw that thing up there.
Yeah, that's where we are. So if he doesn't turn the ball over, because Arkansas State, they'll make you turn it over. Okay. So that's the only downside. They've given up 17 pass touchdowns, but they've intercepted 14.
Yeah, but since he's a true dual threat guy, this is promising. They've given up 28 rushing touchdowns. They're at the bottom end of the rushing too.
Yeah. So like I said, if he doesn't turn it over, this is probably your guy.
Matchup heaven, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And right behind him, again, talking about most leagues, you start 24 quarterbacks a week. Here's another one that is only rostered on 8% of teams, and he's the number
Mm.
19 quarterback in fantasy football, and that's Parker Navarro from Ohio, going against the team we made the most fun of for the first half of the season that you better play your guys against, and that's Ball State. And he's another true dual threat. So they're 96th against the run. You got the passing numbers there for Ball State. They're giving up 22 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, give me 1 second here and go ahead.
All right.
Um,
Well, I'll pull up his last few weeks numbers while you're looking up.
yeah, I don't think Ball State is as bad as the numbers show,
Okay.
but maybe they are. They're pretty low here. Yeah, they are 132nd. So they've given up 33 pass touchdowns.
Yeah.
They give up 286 through the air. So yeah, this is the matchup you want.
And at quick glance, yeah, that 33 is the worst in the country, tied with Tulsa.
Mm.
Tulsa and Ball State have both given up 33 touchdowns, gang.
Well, and then
they're the two teams we've noticed mid-season were the ones you wanted to play guys against, no matter what.
But yeah, and then Ball State's given up 22 on the ground.
Right. So again, very similar to the Colton Joseph matchup, where
Yeah,
they're playing against just a very bad defense overall. So again, he's you got a much better chance of getting Parker Navarro as you do Colton Joseph, and he could probably have just as big of a game for you. He's another guy. The last 2 weeks had 28 points, 46 points. His low game 3 weeks ago was 16, but he had 25 before that. Again, he can drop a low when he had 7 against Miami, Ohio, but before that he had 33 and 33. So he's had maybe just 2 bad games all season. Everything else has been above 15, but the bulk of his games have been over 24, 25 points. So you're dealing with 2 true dual threats here as options, and Navarro's only rostered on 8%, which that tells me he's available in some leagues that are all inclusive, meaning
right.
you have a group of 5 guys. You should be able to get him in your all 134 team leagues, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean these quarterbacks with these rushing or these running back numbers I'm sorry, they just need to be starting.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so perfect timing. We're rolling here. Got 2 minutes for an hour recording, so we'll give these last 2 quarterbacks they're just due. Jennings is a guy for SMU that I had picked up a couple weeks ago in the waiver draft. I apologized to him for a public tweet where I said the SMU quarterback experiment was going to be their doom and their downfall early in the season. Because if y'all remember when they pulled Preston Stone, they didn't look so good. They struggled. But look, now they're going to be in the ACC championship, fighting for a playoff spot. So Kevin Jennings was the answer for them and is the guy that's going to get them there if they make it. He's averaging 21 points a game. Who's his matchup, Willie? I don't have that.
They have Cal.
Okay. And what's that tell us? Let's see what that tells us.
I'm trying to locate Cal. They got to be in the middle of the pack. They are 83rd. But they've only given up 12 passing touchdowns and 17 interceptions that defense has. So you have to look at that too.
Yeah, not too many touchdowns given up by Cal.
No.
Let's see Jennings. I know he's gotten the points. The points aren't a question. I want to see if he runs the ball. Yeah, he's not as much of a dual threat as the other 2.
He's not going to run.
It looks like what happened with him is the coaches reeled him in a little bit. He was trying to run more early in the season, as a freshman would probably tend to do. They reeled him in a little bit. Looks like he's staying in the pocket, throwing more passes than he is running. But he's another guy. He's constantly at 25 points and up for the bulk of the season outside of those first 4 games, where he only had 1 over 20. Since then he's had 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's count the 19.8, 5, 6, 7. Every game over 20 basically since September 28th.
And then I mean that 17 points that he had.
Yeah.
Prior to that is impressive as well. I mean they are on an 8-game win streak, so
yeah. Yep.
It's a possibility.
Yeah, it's crazy. But so again, we said we might just pick 2, but any of these 3 would be solid options to play this week so far. He's one that's not available on as many teams as Navarro, but he's rostered on 23%. He's closer to the Colton Joseph numbers. But again, he's the second freshman now that we've pointed out that's here on the list. So if you're using this more for forward thinking, not even that you're in your championship, because we kind of forgot to address, those folks that are tuning in. Like this is homework for next season that you're doing early right now.
Yeah. He
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's his second year. I was thinking he was a freshman or a redshirt freshman, but yeah, he technically could be a sophomore. You're right. Which that's the theme of the quarterbacks here. Here's your other dynasty guy that hopefully you've got a chance to grab since he's still just on 19% of teams, and that's Marcel Reed from A&M, the last guy that we'll talk about. Wegman went out. Marcel Reed came in. It's an era where you got to keep your young guys happy and play them early. And since he's gotten in, he's very, very similar to Jennings. He's got his first game was 7.1, but that was a blowout against McNeese State. He had a negative .4 against Missouri. Actually, he only played one.
Yeah, I think he was backing up then, most likely.
But in his other 6 games, he's had over 21 points in 5 out of those 6, and the other one was a 17-point game. And he's coming off of a 29 and a 30. They're going against Texas, so let's look at the matchup. I would say he's probably,
unfortunately.
Yeah. This is the one that out of the 4 you'd probably want to stay away from. Texas
second in the country.
And tell them the number. I know you want to mention here. This is crazy.
They've given up 4 passing touchdowns. They have 17 interceptions as a team, and they give up 143.5 through the air.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. 4 touchdowns is all Texas has given up. So I think I'm going to put the red X over Marcel Reed unless you're able to still pick him up in a dynasty league and pencil him in as, a top 25 guy potentially or top 30 guy for next year. That's certainly roster worthy, when you're doing your early homework for the 2025 rankings.
Correct. I mean, and they're tied with Ohio State, so let's give them their due as well, as far as only giving up 4 passing touchdowns all season.
4 passing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, that about does it. I hope this has been helpful. Again, if you're planning for next year, just kind of getting a second opinion on who you might play for your championship quarterback spots, running back spots, etc., or if you have to pick somebody up, maybe it helps you there. But it's certainly been fun this season. Willie, I'm all talked out. You can sign us on out of here. I don't have anything else.
If you guys are the ones who are watching, thank you for that, and absolutely good luck this week.
All right.